This is a beginning African American family history, research, and beyond presentation I gave at the UGA South Davis Family History Fair on Saturday, the 11th of April, 2015. Renowned Black genealogist Charles L. Blockson has said, "Black genealogy is the ultimate puzzle, an adventurous journey through a very personal history." The purpose of this presentation is to help African Americans find their ancestors through many means. I will use my own experience to help document the steps I took to find Sophie Lavelle Kellum and her family through these tips. Use a variety of sources, including census records, to build family trees from present day to 1870. After one has gotten as far back as the 1870 census, look at your ancestor carefully, where they lived and with whom. Try to find family history stories of people living with and around your ancestor. Use applicable internet sites and databases, family history libraries, city and county libraries, where each person may have lived. This applies to everyone in the household of your ancestor, even if the family is white. Use libraries and online databases and county records to find marriage records. If necessary, create demographic searches. Contact and personally interview those who may have information about the family. As you gather information, put it out there. This could include message boards, blogs, Facebook, Pinterest, FamilySearch.org, Answers.com, and etc. Relatives may find you and add to what you have. Use internet search engines and even set up alerts for certain names or places. Pre-Civil War censuses can also help find slave owners. Tax records can be helpful in putting the puzzle together. Look at others who lived in your ancestors' community. Many are probably related. Wills, deeds, inventories, and bills of sale may list names of ancestors. Use indexes, then go to either an original or a microfilm copy. Local newspapers, death records including death certificates, cemetery and funeral home records, Southern Claims Commission, United States Freedmen's Bank records 1865 through 1874, and Southern Plantation records. The 1870 Wall. Most family history research starts with present-day records, then goes backwards. For those of African American heritage, the search begins in the present, then hits a hard place after the 1870 census. My African American research began about 10 years ago in my first family history course at Brigham Young University. I was required to do a census assignment, searching my ancestors who lived at least 4 generations in one area of the United States before 1900. I only had one family that fit into that category, my George Washington Barr family from Stokes County, North Carolina. When I came to the 1870 census for the Barr family, my jaw dropped. At the bottom of the family list, below the farm laborers, was a 16-year-old mulatto servant girl named Sophie Barr. Questions immediately ran through my mind. Here's an example of the 1870 census I was looking at. You will note Sophie Barr at the end, age 16, a female mulatto domestic servant. Because this mulatto servant, Sophie, had the surname of Barr, I suddenly had many questions, including, was Sophie an illegitimate daughter of my third great-grandfather? And if she were, I knew I must be related to Sophie. My only exposure to the slave issue in American history previously was from the 1976 television series Roots. The school assignment began my search for Sophie and her family, both her children and the family she came from. Family histories of slave owners. Turning to my own Barr family history, I noted my second great-grandmother, Sarah Barr Tuttle, daughter of George and Charlotte Barr, has shared information about Sophie with her children and grandchildren. She said Sarah's granddaughter, Iva Lee Sorensen, remembered being told of Sophie. Sarah's father, George Washington Barr, was not wealthy, but a prosperous plantation holder. He gave Sarah and her sister Mary Ann a young black girl to wait on them. She lived with them until she married, and they grew to love each other and stayed good friends even after they were all married. Sarah's daughter Georgia said, "Grandfather Barr owned a few slaves until President Lincoln had them all freed. Mother said she had heard him tell how so many of them cried and wanted to still stay with him. He was always so kind to them. They did keep a Negro nanny. Her name was Sophie, and Mother said many times how she loved her, for she had been with them for so many years." Use online databases and county records to find marriage records. Being a complete novice to the family history research, I suppose that in order to find Sophie's husband and children, I first needed to find who she married. Early on, I had decided the census taker had spelled Sophie's name very oddly, so I changed the spelling to Sophie, S-O-P-H-I-E, a spelling used in the time period. I searched the name Sophie Barr and found no results. Demographic search can be helpful. I also did a search of the 1870 census 4 pages before and after the page that Sophie was listed on to find the names of other black males she may have associated. I found 7. Maybe I could find her as a married woman. Plugging in the surnames of those 7 males with Sophie, using an appropriate birth year and place, I pulled up a marriage record index from Surry County, North Carolina. In 1879, listing a Sophie Lavelle from Stokes County who had married York Kellum, also from Stokes County. This seemed to be the only name that worked. The surname Lavelle I used was that of an 18-year-old farm worker, Jesse Lavelle, who was ironically living on the same farm with the Barr family. Here is an index register of marriages from Surry County, North Carolina, listing Sophie with York Kellum. Use census records to bring the family to present day. I did not know for sure if my Sophie was the one on the marriage record until I pulled up the 1880 census where she was listed with her husband, York Callum, and his parents. I was surprised to see that in 1880, Sophie not only had a son with York, but also a daughter named Lizzie Barr, who was 7 years old. Lizzie's surname Barr let me know I had the correct Sophie. Here is the family on the 1880 census. Use as many sources as possible. Armed with this information, I was able to collect more about Sophie, her husband, and children by using census record, birth records, county historical books, newspapers, military records, state death records, and cemetery records. Here is the family that I found of the children of Sophie Lavelle and York Kellum. Elizabeth Kellum, Alexander Kellum, Cora Kellum, Laura Kellum, twins, David Kellum, Lucy Carolyn Kellum, Chester T. Kellum, and Robert Curtis P. Kellum. Interview those who may have information. I was eager to find out more about my Barr family and Sophie and if there was any familiar connection. In 2007, I convinced my husband to take me to Stokes County, North Carolina. Once there, I made an appointment to visit one of the oldest living great-granddaughters of George W. Barr, Sybil Fowler Walker. With permission, I recorded my conversation with her and asked if she knew if George Washington Barr had any children with his slaves. She tells me a story about her daughter Mary Ann and her friend Walt Kellum.
Family that he may have had some Negro children. Is that true?
Well, it was a common thing then for people who had slaves. But when I had my first heart attack, I was 47. Marion was in college in Macon, Wesley College, and she came home. And this black man had a new car. He was a Kellum. Yeah. And he said he wanted Marion to drive this new car. Well, we trusted him. We weren't. Oh, he had light skin though, so I don't know. But anyway, he got Marion out on the highway that we're driving on, And we didn't worry about our neighbors thinking anything about our daughter going out with a black man, because Howard, he was a good person.
Name
all right.
Howard?
No, that was another one that was Howard, was. His name was Walt Kelly. And anyway, he said, Marianne, you and I are cousins. She came by, and he went home, he didn't come back in. And she said, Walt tells me we are cousins. She said, Mother, how can that be? So Lindsay and I just laughed, I said, I don't know. But now my Uncle Rose said it could be true.
Do not procrastinate interviewing and talking with extended family members. Sybil's husband died just 6 months after our interview, and she moved to Atlanta to live with her daughter and died there a year and a half later. Prove out any information found. I could tell from my conversation with Sybil that she knew nothing about Sophie being the daughter of our common ancestor, but the name of her daughter's friend was not missed on me. I realized that if this Walt Kellum, Sophie's married name, thought he was a cousin to Marianne, one of George Washington Barr's descendants, it must be true. This gave me a push to continue looking at Sophie's family history, and I was determined to find her true parenthood. A note of caution: for the most part, when I interview family members, I find the information they share with me to be fairly factual. But I have learned we all view life through different eyes, and often we are told things which may have been stretched a little or a lot. Because of the sensitive issue of slavery, you will probably find older family members may simply not know any details about the lives of their ancestors, because the information was often too difficult to pass along. State and county historical books. At the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, Utah, I looked in the book, The Heritage of Stokes County, North Carolina. To my great surprise, I found a picture of Sophie, her husband York, and their 2 youngest sons, along with a history of York's family in Stokes County. I almost skipped home after that find. Cemetery records. While researching in the Family History Library, I found Sophie Kellum listed in a cemetery in Stokes County, North Carolina. This gave me the birth and death dates inscribed on her headstone. After this find, I was determined to make another trip to Stokes County and find for myself more proof of Sophie's life, which included her headstone. In 2009, I was able to go again. Put your findings out there for others to enjoy and collaborate. After returning home from this amazing trip, I wrote an article for the LDS Church News sharing the miracle I experienced in finding the cemetery Sophie was buried and eventually her headstone. Little did I know my search for Sophie and her family would not yet be over. Take pictures and document all of your finds. The above photo is of my mother and I taken at Lavell's Chapel in Pilot Mountain, North Carolina. The land and original chapel was provided by Sophie's brother Jesse. This is an example of the memorial I added to findagrave.com for Sophie Lavelle Kellum. Contact others in the family with information. Early in my research, I had determined Sophie Lavelle, born about 1854 in North Carolina, must be the younger sister of Jesse Lavelle, born about 1852, also in North Carolina. But what about that darn name Lavelle? With work, I found Jesse, his marriage, and family. At one point, I was able to correspond by letter and phone with one of Jesse's descendants. It was during a phone conversation I discovered she was not only the 3rd great-granddaughter of Jesse, but also of Sophie. Unfortunately, she knew nothing of Sophie and very little of Jesse, but I was able to obtain a picture of Jesse from her. Use internet search engines. Once while doing a Google search on Jesse and Sophie, I found a book written about African Americans in Surry County, North Carolina. To my surprise, Jesse was in the book. It stated he was the son of a slave woman and a slave owner named James Lavelle. I about fell off my chair. Immediately, I searched for a James Lavelle and found one in Surrey County. This seemed to fit. In fact, James Lavelle looked familiar to me. Searching my database, I found he was the husband of Sarah Poindexter Lavelle, the great aunt of George Washington Barr's wife, Charlotte Scott Barr. A light bulb went on. Here was the connection between the Barrs and the Lavelles. But how and why did these children come to be with the Barr family? More questions and not enough answers yet. Use pre-Civil War censuses. I looked up the 1860 slave census for James Lavelle and found a mulatto male and female child of the right ages. Because I was related to James Lavelle's wife, Sarah, or Sally, I had a family story stating she died in 1862. Reading on, I discovered that James, her husband, left North Carolina, moved to Missouri by his sons, and died there. Here is an example of the slaves that James Lavelle owned in 1860. Slaves are listed on tax records. Looking on an 1862 Surrey County, North Carolina tax list, I found James Lavelle owning nothing but 2 slaves. I wondered if these were Jessie and Sophie. My own family history stated that about this time, James moved to Missouri to live near his sons. Possibly by this time he had sold all of his property except for 2 slaves. It is likely he either gave or sold Sophie and Jessie to his nephew and niece, George and Charlotte Barr, at that time. Here is a closer look at James Lavelle on the tax list. In small communities, many are related. You may find more family living in and around your ancestor. As I researched Sophie and her children and who they married, I found this to be true. Sophie's daughter Lucy married a Dalt Sawyer. Dalt's parents were Adam Sawyers and Letitia Krause. Their marriage license noted Letitia's father was unknown and her mother was Sophie Lavelle. Now that sounded familiar. On Letitia's death certificate, it stated her father was James Lavelle and her mother was unknown. Sophie's marriage license also stated that her mother was Sophie Lavelle. Letitia Krause had to be a full sister to Sophie Lavelle Kellum, making Lucy Kellum Sawyer and her husband Dalt Sawyer first cousins. Here is an example of Adam Sawyer and Letitia Krause's marriage license, listing the mother and unknown father. Now more questions. If Sophie Lavelle and Letitia Krause were full sisters, why did Letitia not live on the Lavelle farm? I looked again on the 1860 slave census. Right below James Lavelle was a Henry Krause, listed with only 1 slave, a 6-year-old mulatto female. This had to be Letitia. The 1870 census for Henry Krause shows that Let was still with the Krause family even after emancipation. If you are not familiar with the catalog in Family Search, here is how one would begin searching there. Pull up Family Search, go into Search, down to Catalog. There you will list your place, surname, title, author, subject, or keyword. I put in North Carolina and Surrey County. Search wills, property deeds, inventories, and bills of sale of slave owners, their parents, and children. Searching the wills, property deeds, and inventories and bills of sale of slave owners may give the names of your ancestors. In some southern states, various counties have indexed their deeds, listing the names of slaves, as the Surrey County, North Carolina did. Once you find the year and deed book, look in FamilySearch.org to see if they have the books microfilmed. Here is an example for Surrey County, 1771 to 1951. This record was found on microfilm at the Family History Library in Salt Lake City. I searched Surry County, North Carolina land and property deeds. I found an example of Robert A. Poindexter being deeded a slave girl from his sister Sarah R. Poindexter. Sally R. Poindexter gave this slave to her brother just 1 month before her marriage to James LaVille. She stated she wanted the slave back if she had any children. The Family Search Catalog can be a huge resource. Once you get into the county of interest, look down the list. I happened to find a listing for slavery and bondage in Surry County. Under slavery and bondage, there were 2 articles: North Carolina Slaves and Free Persons of Color, and Slave Records 1802 to 1860. Always look at original records, not just the indexes. During the majority of my research on Sophie and Jesse LaVelle, I assumed they were full siblings. This was because early in my research, I only looked on a marriage index for Jesse's marriage. When I looked at the original, I could see Jesse's mother was a Mary LaVelle and his father was unknown. Jesse was likely only a half-sibling to Sophia and Letitia, with James LaVelle the common father. Names misspelled? No problem. Letitia LaVille Krause Sawyer's name was spelled many ways on different documents during her life, including Let, Leatitia, Letty, Lutetia, Lely, and Latia. Look at all of the information on the document to determine if it is the person you are looking for. For example, I know the attached death record of Lely Sawyers is of Letitia Krause Sawyers because the informant is her son, Preston Sawyer, and her father is James LaVille. Even last names can change. Remember, after the Civil War, Black Americans could choose their own surname, and sometimes it changed even after that. Local newspapers can be a treasure trove of information. Always check them for your family members. Here is a copy of the death notice of Tabitha Sawyers, Letitia Kraut Sawyer's mother-in-law. Newspapers may be available online, free, or for a fee, or even at the Family History Library, either online or in microfilm form. Other very important Black American records are the United Freedmen's Bank Records, 1865 to 1874. Family Search has over 15,000 of these records indexed with images, and beginning on June 19, 2015, all who are interested are asked to help index the remaining images. The Southern Claims Commission record. These records can be found on Fold 3 or in the Family History Library in Fold 3. Some libraries have Fold 3, and you can get it as a free trial if you'd like. Records of antebellum Southern plantation from the Revolution through the Civil War are also good records. An excellent book written by Gene Cooper can be found on the 2nd floor of the Family History Library. Other helps can be found in the reference area. I hope these hints will help you on your research journey. It has been such a pleasure for me to get to know Sophie, Jesse, and Letitia's families. It appears each of them were great assets to their communities and our nation. I'm so glad I kept looking.